In this video, we're going to go through some reasons your plants aren't thriving in the landscape. So this is going to be a variety of potential issues that you could be facing that would keep your plants from thriving. Maybe they're off color, wilting a lot, just not putting on growth, not meeting the expectations you had for that particular plant. You've seen much better ones in other gardens than the ones that you have in your garden. And you're just kind of trying to figure out, you're trying to do, what steps can I, what could be the problem and what steps could I possibly take? The very first one I want to jump into is the newly planted plant issues. I get a lot of questions over the course of a year about, I just planted it and it's not thriving in some way. Those you kind of have to, you have to give some time to overall, because here is an example. I did a video recently about how to solve root-bound plants. This is a hydrangea paniculata that's extremely root-bound, like the entire root ball here is mostly, it's just mostly all roots. And you can see what that's done to the top, really, because it can't be watered in the container properly, and it's caused some issues up here at the top. If these roots weren't broken up some when they went in the ground, it would continue to kind of suffer like this, because the roots just going in a circle and they're not going out into the surrounding soil. Even if you're watering over here, what good is that going to do if all the roots are over here? The other thing is, when we plant something, depending on the time of year when we plant it, it may need some size reduction on the top. So I had a question this week. I planted a crepe myrtle. It's in full flower. When they planted it, it started wilting every afternoon. That's a lot to ask to put a plant in the ground in the summertime that's in full flower, and you're doing root damage to it. So if I corrected any of this root issue, let's say I'm damaging 20% of the roots, but I'm gonna ask those same roots in a hot time of year to bring water up to the top and keep those flowers fresh. That's probably an unrealistic expectation. If you buy something like a butterfly bush or a crepe myrtle or a vitex or one of those hydrangea paniculatas, one of those summer flowering shrubs, and it's in flower, it might be best to enjoy those flowers in the container for a while and then plant it in the ground. Or alternatively, and what I would do is I'd put it in the ground and off with its head. I just take the flowers off of it, and that kind of puts it back in balance a little bit. That's what I did with this one, right? In that demonstration for the root-bound video, I came in here and cut these roots, pulled at them. I haven't completed everything I would have done on it, but I was showing in that video that cut it back. So this plant was cut back, from about this tall down to this tall. So you got to give time. Sometimes if you're planted something 6 months ago and the flower color's not quite right, it's not as vigorous as you thought, it's wilting a little more than you thought, you got to give some time to those kinds of things. They're just not everything is going to go perfectly. It's weird, sometimes you can put a plant in the ground and it just takes off, hits the ground running, you almost never have to water it again, and then the thing 3 down from it wilts every afternoon for a year and a half until it figures out how to get itself adjusted into the soil. So there can be all types of differences there in light and water and all kinds of things. So newly planted things, sometimes we have to lower our expectations just a bit for a little while. The other thing that might happen during transplant shock is the plant fails to bloom that first year. I think the thing to monitor there, because people get concerned, well, it didn't flower this spring after I had planted it last fall. The thing to monitor there is the plant's putting on new growth. If the plant's putting on new growth, in all likelihood, at some point, it's going to come back around and align itself, and the flower buds will be set and it'll do its thing. I've heard people say my azaleas didn't bloom that first year or whatever. Azaleas need to put on new growth in order to set flower buds. So if you're seeing new growth on it at some point, it'll figure that out. Another reason that your plants might not be thriving is root competition. So in this garden in Raleigh, from where I'm standing right here, this direction, we can plant something in the ground. There's one other section out in the front that has a lot of root competition, but the vast majority of this garden, we can plant something in the ground. We've amended this soil with wood chips and compost and everything else, and we can plant it over here. And generally speaking, if we're getting any kind of regular rainfall, we don't have to do anything. We don't have to do any additional watering unless it's abnormally dry. From here this way, we've got a southern magnolia along the path here. you can see hanging over top of us. These are notorious for being hard to grow things under. They're pretty good at dropping giant leaves on the ground and causing problems. And then to the left of that is a very, very large white oak that is probably in the 75-foot tall range and has run roots all over this garden and so on and so forth. So I got this line of trees back here and we're amending this soil over here. We're giving it water. We're fertilizing it with organic fertilizer in the spring. We're giving all the good stuff for those, and those trees are well established. They can root in here pretty quickly, right? And start taking advantage of all the things that we're doing. And so it slowed things down on this back line. If you plant something into an area with root competition, you know, if somebody's going to tell you, if you ask the question to somebody, well, how long do I have to water it after I plant it? They're going to say until it's established. Well, over here for me, that might be 6 to 8 months of me watching it, okay, and kind of paying attention to it. Back here for me, that's been 2 years. It's taken 2 years for this Mahonia to really just be here on its own and not have to worry about it. That Alyssium that's behind it, that's now 8 feet tall, and I see a flower opening on top of it. It took 1.5 years for that thing to kind of break through. It was wilting every day. I mean, like even days it was raining, that thing was wilting. We haven't had to water it this year, really. We've watered a couple things back here, so it's gotten a little bit of water, but it didn't really need anything. So know the spaces as well. You know, your soil type's gonna matter, root competition's gonna matter, and it's going to extend sometimes the amount of time that you're gonna have to put into it to get it where it can compete with the things that are already there. This oak I just mentioned, initially when we started this project, I had somebody go up there and take a couple limbs off that were hanging way over here into the garden and were kind of a danger. They were just on an angle about like this, and I felt like at some point they were just gonna potentially break off. So we had that done, that surgery done up there, and the tree's been super healthy, got ivy off of it that had been all the way up to the top. And the tree's really thriving, which is great. But now it's actually stretched out probably another 6 or 8 feet this direction, and it's cut off some sunlight back here. So you can have an evolving garden, and I had this at my old house where I planted trees at the same time I was planting all my shrubs and everything in that garden, and then 20 years later, the trees are quite big, and all of a sudden you have a shade garden, and you had planted a lot of sun plants. And that's kind of what's happened here. Our shade line I would have considered somewhere back here initially, and now our shade line is somewhere out here, okay, where we're just, this gap here, we're not getting enough sunlight for some of the things that were planted in here. And I can see that in this golden Oakland holly has lost some color. It's still pretty, it's got a great shape, haven't had to really do any pruning on it, except for up at the top now, I've got this 1 leader that's like 3 feet tall. I cut one off earlier in the year too, cut like 3 of them off, where it's starting to stretch. It's really going, hey, I need some sunlight, so let me get up there and try to get some sunlight. So that's what's happening with it. Sometimes you'll lose some color, and you know, if the plant's supposed to be gold or variegated or something like that, some things need more light to produce those kinds of things. The Japanese maple, this is Tamukiyama, and typically it will hold its color a bit better, kind of a purple foliage on this one, especially when it leaves out in the spring. It always loses a little bit of color, but I think we've reached the point now where it's partly a light related issue. You'll see some of these purple plants lose color during the summertime because I've talked about it's an energy cost to stay purple like that. But in this particular case, I think what's happening with it is happening every season as it's being denied. It needs a little more sun. It's not a full sun plant, but it needs a little more. And then here's a hydrangea paniculata. We think of most hydrangeas as needing kind of part shade, but these paniculatas need lots of sun, okay? And so you see this kind of floppiness that's happening in this hydrangea paniculata. First couple of years it was here, it was up big and tall, perfectly upright, nice rigid growth habit, and was blooming just like a soldier back here. Fast forward a couple seasons, last year it did a little bit of this year it's done a little bit more of this. So it's just kind of telling me this thing needs to be, I need to transplant it out into more sun. This winter I'll cut it back and move it out into a more sunny location. But you can either bring something home and plant it in too much shade, and then these kind of results can happen, or again, your garden can actually evolve over time as the trees you've planted actually grow. Sometimes it's going to take a little bit of experimenting to figure out exactly where a plant goes in your garden. And sometimes you can read it from, if that plant has a big giant range of space that it grows in. Let's say a plant grows, if you buy a hydrangea macrophylla, a big leaf hydrangea, and it says it grows in zone 5 to 9, that's probably an indicator that in zone 5 it's going to need more sun. In zone 9 it's probably going to need some shade, and that's true as we're in zone 8A. Our hydrangea macrophyllas need some shade. We'll go up to way up into the northeast or in Canada, and they're out in the full sun. We were in the Netherlands just a few weeks ago, and they're out in the full sun. It's just different conditions, and it's impossible to make a tag for that, right? You're going to see the tag say sun or part shade, or you're going to see it say part shade or shade, but really it's the further south you go, the more shade it might need. Another thing about having too much sun and those hydrangea macrophyllas do this in too much sun. Another reaction plants can have in too much sun, these chartreuse colored plants, they need the sunlight to keep this color, but if they get too much, they can do this kind of bleaching that happens. You'll see this in conifers too, gold conifers, as we need a lot of sun on them to keep that color. They go green if I had it in too much shade, but when it has too much sun on it, you'll get some reaction like this. On hosta, you might see your hosta just burn during the summer or wilt and just kind of get smaller. You'll see it on any plant that you're sticking out in full sun. They may have different reactions, but certainly that bleaching is a pretty good indication that it's probably getting a hair too much sun in the peak of summer. Part of that is, this plant probably got a little dry at some point, and so having plants that need kind of part shade and you have them in a lot of sun, having them well mulched, making sure they never go dry, because once it goes dry, it's just like your skin at the beach. If you're dehydrated, you're much more likely to get sunburned than if you're, well hydrated. Same thing with these plants. You can't, if you're putting them in a questionable area where it's a little too much sun, you really have to stay on top of making sure that they're not going to be dry. They're well maintained to do that. But too much sun, again, it'll show up in a lot of different ways. You may get basically a crispiness on the ends of the leaves. You'll see that plants that are supposed to get fall color, like a Japanese maple or something like that, don't get fall color because they've been fighting the whole season just to survive in the full sun. You might see it as this kind of bleaching. On a perennial, again, you might see it just getting smaller during the season instead of larger. So there's a lot of indications that your plants are in too much sun. And luckily, most of the time, it won't just kill them. But if you're seeing these types of indications, winter would be the best time to move it. I wouldn't move it while it's under stress in the summer. This is not the kind of thing that's killing this plant or hurting this plant beyond, visual observation. But if I wanted to move it into a little more shade, I would do that during the winter time. I'm going to talk about soil now, and if you follow the channel for any length of time, soil is everything really in gardening. It is the, just kind of the base, it's the thing your plants live in, and it matters probably more than anything else in gardening. It's just continuing to improve your soil. If you want to know, jump into a lot more detail on soil, the Learn to Garden video series is available over on our website, HortTube.com, and there's lots of videos on there about soil-related, soil building. And then there's videos you can just watch on the YouTube channel as well. So let's jump in to soil. Obviously, we can get deficiencies from missing nutrients in our soil, missing elements in our soil. So we could have a calcium deficiency or a magnesium deficiency or a phosphorus or potassium or boron. There's all kinds of deficiencies we could have. A lot of that could be based on our soil type in the area in the country that we live. There'll be some places that'll have too much phosphorus and other places that have virtually none. So that's all over the place, all around the country. I do recommend that you get some sort of baseline soil test when you start your project. If you have multiple soil types in the garden, perhaps you'll get multiple soil tests for those areas. If it all seems kind of similar throughout, you can mix those together and just get one soil test. But you want to find out if you're missing something completely. I'm not a fan of trying to manipulate every nutrient into the sweet spot. If you have some of everything, you're in pretty good shape. Soil pH has a lot to do with this as well. Most of the plants that we have in this garden are acid-loving plants. A lot of these Asian ornamental plants that we have, and all of our native plants to the southeast United States, for the most part, are acid-loving plants, meaning that they like a soil pH that's definitely below 7, some as low as 4.5. So the pH scale is a scale from 1 to 14. 7 is neutral, and 6.5 is typically about the sweet spot where you can try almost anything. The things that like alkaline soil pH is above 7, and the things that are below. So 6.5 is the sweet spot. Most people aren't probably going to have exactly 6.5. Ours is like 5.8 in this garden, and pretty much every nutrient's going to be available at that pH. But pH can lock up nutrients. Like you can have plenty of iron in your soil, but your pH is up around 8. Iron gets locked up and it's not available to plants. So you can get iron deficiency even with iron present. So that's how pH can affect it as well. So learn your pH, get some sort of base soil test, and be careful though not to try to manipulate every single nutrient. But if you're missing something, try and add it. If you're missing phosphorus, especially, super important macronutrient. Beyond that, the other things in soil that can affect plants are, one is compaction. Compaction is a big issue. Any kind of new construction project, they come in typically and they take your topsoil and they move that to the front of the subdivision, and they build a big giant berm and plant shrubs on it, to have that be the kind of screen for the subdivision for noise or whatever. And that's your topsoil out there. And then they leave you with your subsoil. Here in our area, that would just be solid red clay, where any of the organic material was stripped off of it. And then they've run machinery over it repeatedly. We see them building new houses in this neighborhood. They'll put gravel in the front garden so they can park out there the entire time and just flatten it to nothing. And then the last minute put this much topsoil on it and then sod it or whatever. And this soil's so compact, it takes a long time to recover from that. A long time. We were lucky in this project. This is a home that was built in the late 40s, and it had just been mowed weeds basically that entire time. Those weeds are pretty good at rooting deep into the soil, and over time it actually relieved a lot of the compaction. So it was still clay, but a lot of the compaction was gone. So time was on our side on this project. Most folks though, time is not going to be on your side. You're just moving to the house. It's super compact. We like to start projects using wood chips. We'll put a deep layer of wood chips down, and that kind of invites earthworms and other beneficial things to come in and start helping with that compaction quite a bit. Other folks aren't going to have that, not necessarily that luxury, and you're just going to be digging holes in very compact soil. You need to add some organic material to it potentially. We're really, at the end of the day, trying to rebuild the forest floor. And you think about, well, what do you mean by that? When you go out into the forest and you're standing in the woods, you're typically standing on some sort of chunky layer, okay? That's limbs that have fallen, pine cones that have fallen, leaves, sticks, dead animals, whatever it is, okay? That chunky layer that's on the top, right, is your mulch. In your garden, that would be your mulch, your triple shredded hardwood mulch, your cedar mulch, whatever the heck kind of mulch you're using. Red mulch, black mulch, brown mulch, that's the mulch, right? Not recommending any of those, but I'm just saying that top layer. And then a layer below that, if you go down in the woods and you start searching through that, you get down to a humus layer or kind of a compost layer, okay? That compost layer is definitely missing on your new construction as well. And so it's gonna take, if all you're doing is planting something and then mulching, it's gonna take a long time for that mulch to become that compost layer. Think about how many years in the woods it took for all that material to break down and become that layer. So if you can afford it, I would recommend putting some sort of compost layer down and then your mulch cap on top of that so that you've recreated the forest floor. The quickest way to do that is with wood chips, literally just wood chips. They break down very quickly and they create that humus layer that we're missing. And that's the quickest way to relieve some of this. But again, a lot of people just starting in you've already planted plants and you're already in the process. Mulch. Keep it mulched, keep it covered. In time, you'll find that your plants are able to help you, grass is able to help you, and making sure you're moderating the soil moisture so that earthworms are able to live in it, beetles are able to live in it, larvae that you may not like is able to live in it, but anything that's able to live in that soil is going to help you rebuild that texture, rebuild that, that you need air in that soil. That's what's been squeezed out of it. And those things are going to help you get that air back into that soil, which these roots need under the ground. Weeds could be good or bad. First of all, weed is anything that's in your garden that's not desirable to you. So that could be crabgrass or Johnson grass in your lawn. It could be something that's growing in your sidewalk, cracks. It could be a ground cover that you planted, like this sedum down below this palm that just takes over. Potentially. It could be this palm itself. If this palm had become undesirable to me, or if it was seeding itself around the garden, or something else was seeding itself around the garden, a plant you planted could eventually become a weed. So keep that definition. You know, it's anything you don't want in your garden, potentially. Where weeds can become a real problem is they can harbor some undesirable things. So if it's some sort of weed that's in your bed that's keeping the space a little too moist, you know, we think about plants, some people want plants that will dry an area out. Typically, the more plants you put in an area, the more moist it's actually going to end up. You know, it prevents erosion, allows the water to seep into the ground, and actually creates the opposite effect a lot of times, or keeps the area wetter after rains. So you could have slugs, snails, you know, those kinds of things if you're letting some weeds, you know, just travel through your beds. The other thing is the weeds could potentially climb on top of the plant if it's some sort of vining plant, or choke the plant in some way, or they can just out-compete for nutrients and light and everything else and just crawl right up on top of your plants over the course of the season. A lot of these annual weeds are engineered to germinate in the spring, grow about this much, root. First good rain in July, they go boom, and they can just take over a bed really quickly. So staying on top of that and not allowing them to damage your plants is a good idea. The ways in which we prevent weeds in this garden is, number one, we stay on top of them. We do not, as much as possible, we're not trying to let these things seed themselves. We do have the occasional weed that's really good at masking itself that'll get tall in here and probably produces some seed, but otherwise, we have very few weeds out here now because we just keep staying on top of it, and we're lowering that seed count, right? I want to lower that seed count over time and not have them every single time they come up, they produce another 100,000 seeds and the seed bank goes up. Don't want that. So we're, again, pulling them, and then we're using either living mulch like this sedum down here, or other ground covers that are out here in the garden, or we're using triple shredded hardwood to keep kind of a dry socket up on the very top, you know, where it holds moisture in really well. But if you go over to these mulches, typically the top ½ inch to an inch is pretty dry, and it's difficult for seeds to germinate in that kind of dry socket that's created by that mulch. So that's the ways in which we're controlling them. But again, a weed is just something that is undesirable in your garden. It can be someone else's ornamental plant. Number 7 is pest, disease, and other things that sometimes are in your control and sometimes aren't in your control. We had a situation earlier this year where the neighbor oversprayed by accident some Roundup or some other chemical trying to kill some other things, and actually sprayed a vine back here that defoliated. Luckily it has survived. So, you know, it's actually come back nicely. But that's a possibility where you could all of a sudden see something along your property line off coloring really quickly. Hopefully it doesn't die, but you know, it's pretty easy on a breezy day or on an extremely hot day to spray a chemical and accidentally end up spraying something that's desirable in your garden. So, you know, monitor that. If you've gone out and sprayed something, or your neighbors have been spraying something, or you're next to a farm or something like that, it is possible that overspray can be an issue. There's some of the chemistry that's out in the world now is not very good at sitting down pretty quickly. You know, like the chemical just drifts more easily than some of the other chemistry out there. If we come back to this corner is one of the newer planted areas in the garden in the last 1.5 years, and we're struggling with it because deer are coming out of the woods and eating things like the bottom of this holly. right here. So you can see the damage that the deer are doing to that. We'll also get damage from rabbits. We can get damage from all kinds of things that, you know, really aren't in our control. And then, of course, you could have areas of your garden that are potentially too wet. So, you know, when they grade off new properties, potentially, especially in the way subdivisions are done now, where the houses are so close together, if you're the bottom house in a row of 4, you know, you could potentially have standing water. That standing water, what we're trying to build in our soils is beneficial fungi, beneficial bacteria. This plant, I talk about this frequently. The leaf on this Japanese maple is basically a solar panel, okay? This solar panel is creating sugars, you know, through photosynthesis using the sun's energy. It's taking those sugars down into the ground, and it's actually feeding beneficial fungi, mycorrhizal fungi and others, and beneficial bacteria. And in exchange for that, those networks that have literally attached to the roots of this Japanese maple are bringing nutrients and water to this plant when it needs it. So this is an exchange where this plant is making sugar for things that can't make their own sugars because they're down below the ground, okay? So those are beneficial fungi, beneficial bacteria that in this relationship with this plant basically creates very healthy plants. If a place stays too wet, and instead of this mulch being broken down by earthworms and all these beneficial things and feeding the plants properly, in wet environments, sometimes we can get bad bacteria and bad fungi, and those things can be things that attack the roots of our plants and create issues in the gardens with micronutrient deficiencies, you know, in damaging the roots. So I've said maybe you're missing a nutrient in your garden. But if you get a soil test done and you go, well, I think everything's in line, I still don't know why my plants are off colored. If it's in a wet area, that can explain it, because the root system's not working properly. Nothing is working properly to actually get those nutrients up into the plant, even though they're present in the soil. So those, you know, that's the kind of thing that can take place in a wet soil or a boggy place, a place that's not drying out frequently. There are plants that will grow in those situations, and you may need to adapt to that, or get some sort of grading done, or put in some sort of system to make sure that that area is draining in between rains and watering. Another thing in this pest category is we can obviously get chewing insects out in the garden. We'll get aphids, you know, when the new growth is coming out on this grapevine in the spring. It's late season now, so it's starting to go to sleep, but when this grape is leafing out in the spring, typically you'll have a few aphids right out on the newest growth right out on the end. Within days, almost every time, they just disappear. I mean, we have a garden that is full of birds. Birds could come along and do that. We have ladybugs in this garden. We've created a system in which I don't think we haven't had an insect problem run amok yet. Not a single one. There's 450 different plants in this garden. Not a single insect problem that has made me take a plant out or change a plant. Now, I have had to kind of suck it up a little bit and wait a season for the thing to come along and take care of the issue. So you're not going to have, they're not ladybugs sitting here waiting for aphids to be on this thing. You got to have aphids on it in order to have ladybugs. So there is an order to it. I'm going to get a couple insect problems that I kind of have to go, okay, I have to deal with that. But if I've created a healthy garden, I'm inviting, again, you know, birds and other, I'm not spraying general insecticides or anything like that. Something's going to come along that will eat that. And you may still continue to have some of those minor problems, but at the end of the day, I think, you know, you can reach a point in your garden where you reach a balance between a couple leaves getting chewed somewhere and the beneficial things that you need. One thing I'll point out here, I can see on this redbud. So this redbud's a native plant here to our area, and let me pull one of these leaves off. You'll get on redbuds, you'll get these little holes cut in the leaf right here. This is a leaf cutter bee that comes along and takes pieces of the middle of these leaves out, and then they line their nest for this. So this is a native bee taking advantage of a native plant in my garden. I think a lot of people might come along and see the holes in these leaves and think that this is somehow problematic. What actually has happened here is my garden is part of the natural system, and I kind of celebrate these things, especially when you got a native bee on a native plant doing something that they've evolved to do together in a garden. Any spraying I do out here is going to interrupt that. One of the things that can actually damage our plants is the placement where we have them in the garden. It has nothing to do with sun or shade. I've actually done a lot of consultations in the last couple of years where people have white fences, and believe it or not, the back side of their plants are burned badly because the white reflects the sunlight onto it. So if you have a white wall somewhere, it has the potential to burn your plants. Some of these windows, these new windows on houses that are so great at insulating our houses, are actually reflecting light back into our gardens potentially. And when the sun's on certain angles, that can burn our plants. We can have plants burned by wind. This banana shrub here is a great example of a plant that it's zone 8 to 10. But here in zone 8A where we are could potentially be burned by wind, so we have it in a slightly protected area. If you have a darker house and it's on the west side of your house, it can absorb heat all day long and then release that heat all night long, and plants actually grow during the nighttime hours. They use the sun's energy all day and kind of try to survive, during the heat of the summer. And then at night is when they're going to turn those sugars that they've created, and all the things that are happening in the soil are going to happen, and those plants are going to put on growth. That heat island that's created by that never cooling down can stunt your plants in a way too. Having your plants spaced very widely apart and then having dark mulch around them can be an issue too. We can overcrowd plants for sure. There's obviously a possibility if you have plants that are susceptible to leaf spot diseases and that kind of thing. We don't necessarily want them on top of one another, but what you'll notice in this garden as we've gone around to different spaces here filming is the plants are reasonably close together. Well, each of these plants is helping these other plants keep their roots cool. In a natural environment, I don't care whether it's a grassland or a woodland, you're going to have plants growing pretty close together, and they're competing with one another. Obviously, they want light, they want water, they want soil nutrients, they want all those things, but they are also helping one another in shading their roots, keeping the area around each of the plants cool. They're all in the heat of the summer blowing a little bit of water vapor out to create some evaporative cooling around them. So they're actually working together. And when we see new plantings in gardens where the plants are, because I read the tag and the tag said they get 3 to 4 feet wide, so I'm going to plant them all 4 feet apart. And then we used really dark colored mulches. I would not expect for those plants to perform very well when that mulch is getting as hot as it's getting every day. Those roots are really going to struggle in that. Number 9 is watering, and watering is the hardest thing to teach in gardening. It's really, it's the biggest amount of questions I get and the least amount of answers that I have. And I've been doing this for 40 years, and I've been answering gardening questions that whole time. There is not a pattern that necessarily fits all gardens in terms of watering. If you live in an area with low humidity versus an area with high humidity, the day length, the sun angle, the amount of wind that the plant is experiencing, the soil type. I mean, there's so many factors that go into when and how to water plants. But there are some things to look for in terms of plants being over or underwatered for sure. I mean, number one for plants, and there's whole videos on the channel about watering plants if you want to go and take a look at one of those. This is going to be a shortened version here. When plants are overwatered, they tend to have nutrient deficiencies that show up in the newest growth on the plant. And so if we have a green plant like this Distilleum back here, and I'm seeing yellowing up in the tips of this plant, typically that's some sort of nutrient deficiency. It can be that you're missing that nutrient in the soil, or the other thing that could happen, like I said earlier, is it could be that it's too wet of a space, and that's actually blocking the root's ability to pull that nutrient up into the plant. So we can see nutrient deficiencies based on overwatering. We can also see things, unfortunately, get things like Phytophthora or Pythium or one of the root rot related diseases and just die. Overwatering is the worst kind of watering because you can't recover from it frequently. Once the roots are rotted on your plant, it's just kind of done frequently. Sometimes it can show up as underwatering because it's in a wilt. But what's happened there is you've got root damage that's happened and now it can't bring water up into the top. So it is in fact underwatered, but it doesn't necessarily mean there's no water there, right? So that, that can be a mysterious one. So check, regardless of what the plant is showing you, pull some mulch back, put your finger down. If you're starting to be confused by it, you can get an inexpensive moisture meter on Amazon, or you can stick your finger down in the ground and see if it actually needs water. The too little water, I'm back to this Weigela again, because this is one of those signs of potentially, the sun burnt it, but it probably burnt it because it was a little dry at that time. So you obviously get wilting on the plant. Some plants are good at wilting. Conifers are not great at wilting and frequently will just start to thin out and potentially die from underwatering. It's really about consistent moisture without keeping plants wet. And again, I cannot tell you in your sandy soil or your clay soil or your Phoenix, Arizona location or your Key West, Florida location or your, whatever. All the extremes of soil and weather across the country. You're going to have to figure out this pattern for yourself. But what you need is consistent moisture without the space actually being wet. And that's ultimately what we're going for. That's ultimately what most of these plants need. There are specialty plants that require bog conditions and consistent moisture. And there are plants that are desert related plants that, if you were watering them once a week, they would die from being overwatered. So there are specialty plants, obviously, but the vast majority of the ornamental plants that we grow in most of our gardens in the areas of the country where we get rainfall, consistent year-round rainfall, are going to be plants that need some consistent soil moisture. And you're going to have to figure out that pattern, unfortunately, on your own. One thing, unfortunately, we can't control is weather extremes. And I've definitely seen some changes over the course of the time that I have been doing this, where plants definitely seem a bit confused at times about what they're supposed to be doing out here because, we're seeing wild extremes and we're standing in front of our Empress of China dogwood right now to show this off. This is the second year in a row that it's fall bloomed. This is definitely a spring blooming plant. We have all of our Encore Azaleas, which are typically fall blooming throughout August. We've seen them all over the city. They look great. It's amazing, but they're definitely blooming a month and a half early. Several other things doing that. It's obviously some sort of up and down in the weather that's, confusing the plants a bit. We're extremely dry right this minute after having something like 10 inches of rain in 1 week, like 4 weeks ago. You would think that we would have had plenty of rain, but the problem is that rain actually fell in flooding events, and so it actually didn't saturate very far down into the ground. So it's what I would call superficial watering, where you look at the ground and go, hey, it seems pretty moist out here, but if you were to dig down more than an inch or two, you would find it's just basically dust under my feet right now. Despite having some rain, it's just the way that rain fell. If we would have gotten that rain over a 2-week period of time in a steady fashion, we'd have all the water we need right now. But instead, lots of it went washing away. And so we're seeing, if we have heat extremes, cold extremes, rapid changing extremes are probably the worst. Plants are very unprepared for what we had last winter, which was the month of November here in Raleigh. We had 60-degree nights, days in the 70s, 60-degree nights. And then in December, we had a 14-degree night. And so you look at that and just go, well, how is a plant supposed to prepare for that? And I've done consultations all year this year with underperforming ornamental trees where they've cracked during the winter time. So Japanese maples, red buds. We were lucky, our weeping red bud in the back there did have a cracked limb, but it was up in the top of the plant and I was able to cut it out We didn't have one that was at the bottom, but I've seen a bunch from the bottom this year. So Coosa dogwoods, native dogwoods, red buds, amelanchiers, all the understory native trees. We saw crepe myrtles killed in Nashville 2 or 3 winters ago. I can't remember, maybe 4 winters ago now, you know, where it got cold so suddenly that it just cracks them open. Even surface roots, if you have surface roots on top of the ground, I've seen those crack from those types of extremes. So it's this roller coaster some of the plants on. So sometimes it's about finding spaces in your garden where winter wind are not going to affect them. That I mentioned the magnolia in the back garden, that Stellar Ruby magnolia, we have it out of the wind. So the winter wind can't have an impact on it potentially during the winter. So those kinds of extremes, unfortunately, are not necessarily, we can't prepare for those, except for one thing. We continue to work on our soil, and I can't stress this enough on this channel, that having plants that have a mycorrhizal, you know, beneficial fungi, beneficial bacteria relationship, the area is mulched, it's kind of consistently moist but not overly wet, if we can avoid that, and we're continuing to build our soils, then your plants will find some resiliency in that. Your garden will find some resiliency in that. It'll find a way to fight back against some of the insect problems. It'll find a way to fight back against some of the disease problems that can be created by weather extremes. It can, and any of the cracking and, you know, other things. Just making your garden more resilient through soil building is the key to kind of fight that what feels like ever-changing battle of weather events that just kind of come after our gardens, seems like nonstop. So there you go. That's 10 reasons why your garden may not be thriving, why your plants may not be thriving. Hopefully some of those ideas and some of those thoughts can help you in your garden. Thanks so much for following along.